Good evening. I'm Mike Kuckelman, Chairman of the Kansas Republican Party. Welcome to Wichita for our third of four debates for our U.S. Senate race. Wichita is known as the air capital of the world. It's our largest city in Kansas, and those of you that love history know that Wichita had its start with the Chisholm Trail in the 1860s. It's great for this debate to look out and see a live audience again. I know several of you are joining us by live stream. We have taken careful measures tonight in this large venue to engage in all social distancing that is recommended. We are doing it according to guidelines provided to us by the experts. So it is good to have a live audience here and a live audience that is adhering to the social distancing requests. So welcome, and to those of you out there on live feed, welcome to you as well. As I said, this is our third of four debates. We're doing one debate in every congressional district. After tonight, we'll have one to go, and that's in the 2nd District. That debate will be on July 15, and that one will be in Atchison. Tonight, we are covering health care, and there has been a slight change. You may recall we released all of the details of topics for debates back in February. Last week, I received a request from the campaigns to add an element of COVID-19, the economic impact. All of the candidates asked for that, agreed to that. So tonight, we'll be focused on health care, but you will also hear questions about COVID-19. Let me start with introductions here of our candidates, and let me tell you before they come out, before you all came in, they drew for position on the stage. So by drawing, they all were able to pick the podiums that they wanted. Let me start with on the far end, if I could welcome to the stage Congressman Dr. Roger Marshall.
Great.
Candidate Marshall is a longtime practicing physician obstetrician from Great Bend, and of course is currently a congressperson from our 1st District. Next, I would like to welcome to the stage candidate David Lindstrom. Candidate Lindstrom is a former member of the Kansas City Chiefs football team, and he has been a successful businessman in Johnson County, as well as held elected office in Johnson County. And next, I would like to welcome to the stage Chris Kobach. Candidate Kobach is former Secretary of State here in Kansas, and he is a former law professor. Now, there's one additional candidate I want to mention because I received questions and, frankly, complaints that the party hadn't included candidate Bob Hamilton, who is now on the airwaves, and is, people know who he is. He's on the airwaves, and so I had questions or complaints. I want to be clear that we did invite candidate Hamilton to participate in this debate. He had an open invitation right up until this moment to be here. We're disappointed he chose not to be here. He has a daughter getting married on Saturday. I know he was here campaigning in Wichita last night, but to be clear, the party did invite him and did encourage him to attend. And after the last debate, we were told that he would participate in the next two. So for those of you that were asking a question, I understand why you were asking. For those of you who were perhaps making some assumption and criticizing, I hope you'll take the same time to go back and correct that on social media. He definitely was included. All right, next, we're going to have a welcome here to Wichita. The welcome comes from someone that probably doesn't need an introduction in this group. Of course, it's our Kansas Senate President, Susan Wagle. Senator Wagle has broken through glass ceilings in politics here in Kansas. She's the first female Speaker pro tem. She was the first female leader of the Kansas Senate. And I think it's appropriate that we point those out as we are celebrating the centennial of the 19th Amendment. Senate President Wagle has been a leader and has broken through lots of glass ceilings and done an outstanding job for Republicans here in Kansas. She's a strong conservative voice for limited government. She's a strong conservative voice for individual liberties. And you all know that she's very pro-life. And she led the first bill in this state when our House and our Senate weren't quite so pro-life. So she has made big strides for all of us Republicans in Kansas, all Kansans, for the unborn. With that, I would welcome President Wagle to make a few remarks here this evening. Senator Wagle.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. It's great to be in a small crowd. God bless y'all. I want to welcome everyone to Wichita, the air capital of the world, the manufacturing hub of the state of Kansas, a state that's deeply rooted in agriculture. And every one of you as Republicans have heard every election cycle that we need your help, we need your donations, we need you to talk to your friends and neighbors, we need help with door knocking, and this election's important. But I'm here to say that this is very likely the election of a lifetime. You can see it unfold in the airwaves. Capitalism is under attack, and our entrepreneurial way of life is at risk. The results of this election are very important to our future, to our children's future, and clearly to our grandchildren's future. The left continues to push for more and more government control, more control over our lives. And it's almost as if they want government to be like our God. And just to give you an example of what I've experienced in Topeka underneath a Democrat governor, when COVID hit, she closed down our churches and our businesses. We understood that. But she didn't have the right to close down churches that were practicing social distancing. She didn't have the right to infringe on our right to worship. So we had to take her to court. And thankfully we won. But then she wanted to extend the business closure. And we had to have an outcry of small business owners and restaurant owners and everyone come to Topeka and say, we want to go back to work. We need to feed our families. We had one barber show up from McPherson who had an arrest warrant because he just wanted to feed his family after the minimum time had, and there were very few cases in McPherson, and she wanted an oppressive government. She wanted Kansans to rely on unemployment and that extra $600 a week the feds had just appropriated. She would rather Kansans not work. But you've heard about the unemployment system. You know your friends couldn't get through on the phones. You know we got kicked off of computer systems. You know it took weeks to get involved, to get your checks. And then once you qualified, the next week you were kicked out. And just the other day we learned that private information for people in the database who were receiving unemployment was mailed to the wrong households. And in that information, there were social security numbers, your education data, where you were educated, your previous employment history. It was very private information. So finally, she let go of the Department of Labor secretary. But that's what government is. It's unreliable. It doesn't work when you need it, and that's what she wants us to rely on. She also vetoed some very, very important bills that the Republican legislature passed. We passed a property tax transparency bill that would allow all Kansans to know which local government increased their taxes and allowed them a way to protest that tax increase. She vetoed a bill that provided new, very low-interest loans to small businesses, to farmers and ranchers who were hit hard by COVID, at no cost to her, at no cost to the state government. She vetoed that bill. And then she vetoed a bill, this was ridiculous, she vetoed a bill that required our foster care system give out report cards and be held accountable for the children that are under their care. Are they getting the needed services? Are they being placed? She's vetoed a lot of bills. We know what the Democrats want. They want more control. They want more government. They have moved to the left. They do not respect our way of life. It used to be you could dream big and you could work hard and you could reap the profits. But that's not what they want. They want equalization. They want to take away your right to work. They want your right to advance in your own society to be subdued. It's a very, very, very important election year. I'm going to have a grandson born in the next few days, number 16, and he's going to be born with a burden of debt on his back that's absolutely unreal and that Pelosi wants to make greater. So we're losing the future for our children. We're losing our way of life. So it's very, very important that we all commit to supporting our candidates once this primary is over in August. I'll be out there working for the U.S. Senate candidate to make sure he's elected, because the Democrats have this top-down system. They've already picked their candidate. She has raised millions of dollars in New York, in California, and they've already chosen their candidate. So we're going to all need to go work for the candidate who wins this race. And we need to elect President Trump again. And it's very, very important. As the Senate President, I'm working hard on the Kansas Senate races. We want to maintain our 2/3 majority so we can override her vetoes on this very important legislation. We need a few more people elected in the House. But it goes top down, people. We need to elect Trump. We need to elect our U.S. Senator. He needs to stay Republican. And then we go down ballot and we stay Republican. We need a year of success in Kansas. We need you working hard. We need you donating. We need you knocking on doors. It's very important to our way of life. We can't turn this over. It's too great. It's been too successful. We are the envy of the world. So God bless you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. In Wichita, we have so many wonderful people who get very engaged in campaigns. So thank you for all you're doing. God bless you.
Thank you, Senator Wagle, for your comments, and thank you, Senator Wagle, for all you have done for Kansans and continue to do for Kansans. Next, we will have the invocation. As you know, we start all of our events in prayer. And tonight, in prayer, I would ask that we all remember or pray for two Republicans that do so much here in the state of Kansas. As you know, Carl Walston, a good friend of ours, is fighting cancer. And I know he and Maricel tonight are making some important decisions about his treatment. He's doing well. I talked to him, and he is doing well in his treatment. But I do know that they're making some important decisions about how the treatments go forward. So tonight, if your special intentions, if you would, please, let's pray for Carl and Maricel. They do so much for our party. I would like to call up Bishop Wade Moore to lead for the invocation. Bishop Wade Moore is responsible for operating Urban Preparatory Academy here in Wichita. It's a private K-8 school that provides quality education to students regardless of their socioeconomic situation. He's also the pastor of Christian Faith Center. He and his wife have been married for 30 years. They have 3 grown children, and I understand they have 5 grandchildren they're watching tonight, so we want to make sure we mention the 5 grandchildren, Bishop. Bishop, if you would, please. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I got 2 now. Thanks.
Amen. Before I pray, I'm a pastor and I know preaching, and Senate President Wagle just preached. So that was good preaching, yes. Let's pray. Almighty God, in the name of Jesus, first of all, we just thank you for this day that you've given us. We thank you, Lord, for where we are right now in history. We know that you've got your hand upon our country, and Lord, that you are leading us and guiding us. And Father, we're thankful for the leadership of our country. We pray for our president in the name of Jesus, that you'll continue to lead him and guide him. And Lord, we pray for the great state of Kansas. Lord, that the state of Kansas will remain great, mighty God. And Lord, we're thankful for our candidates tonight. And Lord, I'm asking you to keep your hand upon them, their families. Let them, mighty God, lead us where you want us to be. We're asking that you'll bless their campaigns, bless their health and their strength, and give them endurance, mighty God. And Lord, we ask you to keep your hand on the United States of America. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Bishop. And Carl and Maricel, I know you're watching tonight, so know that you just had prayer from all over the state of Kansas. You just that should lift you. Next, we would like to introduce for the pledge someone probably who doesn't need much introduction here in Wichita. You all will recognize him. It's your sheriff, Sedgwick County Sheriff Jeff Easter. He is a native Kansan. He graduated from Friends University. In 2012, he was elected sheriff of Sedgwick County. He is about to start his 3rd term, He has been the recipient of numerous awards, including Kansas Sheriff of the Year, Law Enforcement Officer of the Year, Law Enforcement Professional of the Year, and he is a devoted father of 4 children. Sheriff Easter, if you would, please lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff Easter, for leading us in the pledge, and thank you, Sheriff Easter, for keeping Sedgwick County safe. Now, we're ready to get to the business part that these 3 candidates are here and prepared for. So I would like to introduce our moderator tonight. Our moderator is Craig Andrus, who is with KSN, a long-time Kansan. He's a long-time journalist, and he is also a proud father, raising children nearby here. I'll turn it over to the moderator. Craig, take it away.
Thank you very much. Quick word to everybody. We will keep strict guidelines as we can. We'd ask you to keep, again, comments, clapping to the end, completely to the end. We will keep a close eye on time, and we have allowed candidates to do some rebuttal. And we do have some COVID questions because we're all kind of living in that space. So, gentlemen, thank you for being here. Let's begin. Our first question goes to Mr. Lindstrom. The question begins for the first COVID question, and I do have a couple here. COVID-19 is here.
Craig, we do an opening.
Jumped right to it. Let's start with the opening statements. Begin. Mr. Lindstrom.
Make sure the green. The green light is on.
Do we want the green light off? As I was saying, it is an honor to be here with you this evening. But I have to tell you, I'm a little disappointed. I'm disappointed that tonight's debate topic is only about health care. There are so many other issues that we could be talking about. Health care is a very important issue, no question about it. But there are other issues that are going on in this country that we need to talk about as well. We must have a serious discussion about what's going on in America right now. America is being destroyed from within. People don't feel safe. And America is being destroyed from within. We need to protect our citizens from the radicals trying to destroy America. The tragic incident in Minnesota should be universally condemned. The left, however, is using that incident to create fear, to create panic, to create chaos. Cities in this country are burning. The moral fabric of our country is on fire. The mainstream media is fanning those flames. We need to restore order in this country. We need to get our economy back on track. Healthcare is important. But let's get real here tonight, folks. Our country is under attack. We need to save our country before it's too late. Thank you.
We'll now move to Mr. Kobach for opening statement.
I agree 100% with Dave. We are in a new environment right now. Things have changed just in the last 2 months, and they had changed incredibly in the 2 months before that. But I believe there's a battle for the American soul going on right now, and the answer is for us to double down on our conservative values, to preserve American history, preserve American monuments, preserve the American creed, preserve all that we hold dear about our country and our Constitution. And that requires a true conservative in the Senate to do that. And I think I am that person. You know, when I make a promise, I stick to it. I promised we'd have the safest elections in America when I became Secretary of State, and we have them. Photo ID, proof of citizenship, prosecution at the Secretary of State's office. I've also made a lot of promises and kept them in immigration for the last 2 decades. I've been advising President Trump on immigration issues since the 2016 campaign, and I have continued to work in that area. I'm leading now, as General Counsel, We Build the Wall, which built the first ever privately funded border wall in U.S. history. And I brought the first case on behalf of the 10 ICE agents who sued against DACA in 2012. In fact, I just had a conversation with the President on Saturday night after his rally in Tulsa about the DACA case, because that battle to end DACA is still going on. And it takes perseverance and conservative guts to make sure that this happens. I'm making a promise now, too, tonight, that I will continue to fight for these values. I will fight to ensure that we return law and order to our streets. I will fight to be the President's point man on immigration. He doesn't have anyone that right now in the Senate who knows the issue forward and backward. And I promise on judges, we will continue the fight. As someone who taught constitutional law for 15 years, I can tell you, and has litigated against the ACLU in numerous cases, I can tell you that the lawfare of the left, which is the term they used, is the battle is on. And we need to make sure that no more activist judges get into the federal courts. And when that new vacancy comes up in the Supreme Court, it will be Armageddon on the Judiciary Committee. I want to serve on that committee. Kansas doesn't have anyone right there, and we haven't had one for 10 years. I want to fight that fight, and I will do it for you.
Mr. Marshall, opening statements.
I was born and raised in Butler County, where my dad was the chief of police for some 25 years. My dad taught me right from wrong, and he taught me about the importance of law and order. But one of his favorite sayings was, 2 wrongs don't make a right. 2 wrongs don't make a right, and that a crime of retaliation is wrong. Now, certainly every American has the right to peacefully protest, but no one has the right to vandalize or steal another person's property. Now, the Democrats, they want to defund the police, but I'll always see this issue through the eyes of the son of a police officer. And I promise you, I'm going to keep standing with President Trump to make sure the men and women in blue have everything they need to maintain law and order. Now, I'm no stranger to standing beside President Trump. 98% of the time, I voted to support him. 98%, one of the top 10 voting records in all of Congress to support our president. I've stood beside him through the impeachment hoax, through trade wars, the coronavirus, and now these riots. And as your next senator, I promise I'll keep standing beside the president and stop the left socialist agenda. Now, over the past 3 or 4 weeks, I've had the opportunity to be in over 50 communities, and everywhere we go, I get a COVID question, something like, what does the new normal look like? And if I could just offer this advice to everybody here tonight, you can let the COVID virus consume your lives, or we can learn everything we can about it and manage it as safely and responsibly as possible. And the good news is our economy is rebounding. And as your next senator, I'm going to keep standing beside you. I'm going to be working with you and your families to protect your health, help you get your jobs back, and get our sick kids safely back to school. Finally, I just want to thank all those folks who've endorsed us, especially the Kansans for Life. As an obstetrician who's delivered over 5,000 babies, the sanctity of life is so important to me. And thanks to the Kansas Livestock Association, Kansas Farm Bureau, and my good friend and mentor, Senator Bob Dole. Thanks, and I look forward to this discussion tonight on health care.
Candidates, thank you for the opening statements. Now we'll get to the questions I was so eager to get to. From order, we have started with Mr. Kobach. You will answer this question first. Question is, COVID-19 is here. What is your plan to combat specifically this coronavirus? And secondary, we will allow your response about the economic impact of this health issue.
Well, the coronavirus itself, the medical issue, is an evolving threat. And of course, we would all like to see a vaccine. But of course, that vaccine should not be mandatory. That vaccine should be voluntary. But as far as the economic calamity that we now find ourselves in, I think the first and foremost thing that we must do, as 40 million Americans are out of work, is ensure that Americans are first in line for those jobs as they try to find them. And this is an area I've worked on for many years. H-1B, H-2B visas have been used to displace American workers. Indeed, here in Wichita, unemployment's 30%. And did you know that in the aviation industry, workers from India on H-1B visas are displacing Americans? I've talked to 2 who have seen it happen and it's actually happened to them. And H-2Bs are a problem as well. And I was shocked on May 26th when Congressman Marshall signed a letter with 37 other moderate Republicans asking President Trump to keep bringing in more H-2Bs. They come in at 83,000 a year. Well, guess what? 17 million Americans are competing against H-2B visa workers. And I said that was wrong. And I wrote an article that was wrong in Breitbart. You cannot, at this time, be opening the doors wide for foreign workers when we have to get our own citizens back to work. Well, President Trump, 2 days ago, on Monday, rejected the demand of those 38 House members. Lou Dobbs called them rhinos for writing it, but I'd like to give Roger Marshall a chance to answer Lou Dobbs. Why in the world would you want 83,000 more H-2B workers to come in and compete with Americans for those jobs?
Okay. Mr. Marshall, your turn to answer the question. You can rebut if you'd like during your time. COVID-19 is here, plans to combat it specifically, and talk about the economic impact of this health issue.
Yeah, Craig, I'd prefer to rebut, since you brought my name, rebut it and then answer my question, if that's okay.
We'll start that clock now for the rebuttal. Thank you.
Okay. Look, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to show and demonstrate my 100% record of supporting President Trump's immigration policies, my 100% of helping President Trump fund the wall, and I'm so proud that he's built 200 miles. We have 200 miles to go. I fully support the President's executive order. These were temporary visas that would have helped grow Kansas jobs. The fake news part of this is that I've supported the President's big immigration policy. This is a small part of it. I have continued and I will always support the President's policy on immigration. But what the real issue is making sure that we send a candidate to the general election that can beat Barbara Bollier, because she will have open borders, sanctuary cities. She will open the doors to all immigrants, and they'll get a free ride. This is why it's so important that there's so much at risk in this election.
I will allow Mr. Lindstrom, if you have a rebuttal to that specific one, if you would like to.
Answer the question or a rebuttal?
Rebuttal for this.
Well, first of all, I have never lost an election to Barbara Bollier. And honestly, I've never lost an election that I ran on my own as well. As it relates to COVID-19 and plans to combat that, I think we need to bring the PPE back from China into this country. Not only do we need to bring that equipment back here, but we also have to bring the manufacturing back in from China as well. It needs to be made in America. We also have to be working on the vaccine and the testing. As far as the economic impact has been devastating for this country. How many small businesses in this state have gone broke?
Thank you.
Excuse me.
We will now begin with Mr. Marshall for your answering the question. Would you like me to repeat the question?
I'm good.
Okay. Please continue.
So I'm the candidate up here that's been working with President Trump on this already. Since January 28th, I've been engaged protecting the health and well-being of Kansans. I've worked to bring testing and PPE to our communities, making sure our doctors and nurses had everything that they needed to take care of us. And going forward, that testing and PPE is so very, very important as well, so that if a person does get sick or if one of our kids have a virus, that we can hop right on it and do the tracing. We need further liability protections for those decision makers. But look, I'm also the candidate up here that's helped build a strong economy once with President Trump. By rolling back taxes, by rolling back regulations, we've built a strong economy, and it's happening already. As I've been across the state, I'm just amazed how strong the economy is, how many people are indeed back to work. But what we can't do is send a person who will fail us and turn the economy over to Democrats. The Democrats want a socialist takeover of the economy. Medicare for all would mean less Medicare for everybody. It would mean less health care for everybody. The Green New Deal would kill the Kansas economy, kill the Kansas oil and gas industry. Those are what's at risk, giving up our economy to the Democrats, and that's why we need to make sure we send a true conservative who can beat Barbara Bollier in the general election.
For the answer to the question directly, would you like me to repeat the question?
I thought I did answer the question.
You did. It was offer of rebuttal time, but would you like to continue?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah. But if I have time, I'd like to talk about, if I have some time, do I?
You do, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
If I have time, listen, what I would like to talk about is term limits. Okay? I'd like to talk about term limits. I'd like to talk about someone who wants to serve for the sake of serving and not for the sake of self-serving. I'd like to talk about not career politicians, not wannabe career politicians. That's what I'd like to talk about. I'd also like to talk about ending congressional perks and pensions. Okay? And who's in favor of that? And
okay,
I'd also,
I will ask
and
at
finally,
this time.
finally, what I'd like to talk about is pay for performance, which means if we're going to have $22 trillion deficits, what we're going to do is we're going to dock congressional and senatorial pay for everyone that votes on those kind of issues. That's what I'd like to talk about.
Thank you. And again, I'd like to remind everybody, I understand you're enthused, and we're glad that you're here, but let's please hold the applause and the comments to the end. I know you're enthusiastic. Thank you. We will move on now to the next question, and we will start with Mr. Marshall on this one to answer this question. COVID-19 Part 2. More Kansas cases are being reported of COVID-19 right now. We're told this thing is going to be with us for some time. So what should the federal response be to COVID-19 if we see a spike specifically in numbers?
Well, first of all, even though the number of cases are going up, the number of admissions are relatively small. We're admitting about 9 or 10 patients per day. And fortunately, the death rate's about 1 or 2 people per day, about the same as motor vehicle accidents. So Kansas has actually done a great job managing this. What we can't have is a one-size-fit-all, a federal dictum on how we should be handling this. The job of the federal government is to give us the tools that we need to solve the problem, which is exactly what this president has done. I've been so proud to work with him, bringing the testing and equipment that we need here to Kansas to keep jobs open. So I'm excited with where Kansas is right now. We do have a little hiccup going on in southeast Kansas. I'm keeping my eye on that, making sure that they have all the testing that they need down there and doing the tracing as well. So we need to keep an eye on this, but what we can't have is the governor telling us exactly micromanaging which county can be open and which not. In northwest Kansas, we haven't had 20 or 30 cases yet. So we need to address each community by itself. Each community needs to solve this one community at a time.
Okay, we'll move to Mr. Kobach, your response to the question.
The federal response should be similar to what we saw last time, but I think the best part about President Trump's leadership is he did allow states to go their own way and to choose their own path, and we learned from that experiment when states did that. We learned that states like South Dakota, which actually did very little shutting down, but maintained social distancing nonetheless, they were perfectly fine, and their economy was not crippled like so many other states. Now, obviously, in New York City on the subways, yeah, you've got an environment there where that's highly likely to transmit the disease or to the virus. But we don't have to have a one-size-fits-all solution. But I will say this, too. The federal government's response should not be to shovel more money at the problem. We've already spent $2.1 million. Nancy Pelosi wanted another, $1 trillion. She wanted another $3 trillion on top of that. And we have to have someone in Washington who is serious about going back to the previous normal, not the new normal, and then cutting federal spending from there. $23 trillion debt was obscene. Getting beyond that to the levels we're seeing now is ridiculous. And I have shown that I cut my agency by 34% in 8 years. No other agency in Kansas government did that. You have to send a serious cost cutter to Washington. And I think there's someone else on the stage who has a record in that regard, and that's Roger Marshall. He had a chance to vote in 2018 on H.R. 5895, and that was a bill to cut federal spending by a little 1%. He voted against that bill along with 185 Democrats. On the same day, he voted against a bill to cut the National Endowment for the Arts, a minuscule amount, also with the Democrats. I don't think he's serious about cutting spending. I want to know why he voted that way on that bill.
Okay, we'll offer a direct rebuttal if you have one.
Yeah, more fake news from a failed, desperate candidate. I have voted 98% with President Trump, 98% of the time, and the handful of times I voted against him was I didn't want to spend as much money as he had. I have the most conservative records in all of Congress. I'm proud of my record. I'm proud that I've stood beside President Trump. We built this great economy. The coronavirus came, it took us down, but we're going to build this economy again, and that'll improve our tax base. But this country does need to go on a diet, a spending diet as well. We cannot continue to spend all this money that we are in social programs. And one of the great opportunities to decrease spending is in health care. Healthcare spending makes up 28% of our federal budget. And I'd love to talk more about those opportunities that we have, whether it's more Medicare Advantage, giving patients more choices, more things like healthcare savings accounts and healthcare reimbursement accounts as well. So I'm proud of my record.
We now move on to the question. Mr. Lindstrom, would you like me to repeat?
The COVID-19 federal response?
Correct.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think the federal response was appropriate. Securing our borders is in our national interest is a main priority of our federal government. But I also believe that best government is local. And so I would agree with the states having control over what they think is best for their own state. That would be my answer.
Thank you for that. We will now move on to the next question. And the question will first go to Mr. Lindstrom once again at the random order. The question is this. It is no secret that Kansans value their freedom. Do you wear a mask, and do you expect others to wear a mask in different settings?
I got my mask here. Hold on. It's in one of these pockets. I think we are a free country, and I think that if there is a very definite health vulnerability, then people ought to be wearing masks. But we ought to be able to let folks. I think the hypocrisy of some of these rules, where I would be traveling around the state, and we couldn't congregate at our churches, but Home Depot, you couldn't find a parking spot. Where's the consistency there? So I think people ought to have the right. We have a free country. People ought to have a right to wear a mask if they want to. If they don't want to wear a mask, they shouldn't have to wear a mask. But you don't need to congregate with someone who you feel is going to contaminate you.
Thank you for the response. The question now moves to Mr. Kobach. Same question. You wear a mask, and what about others around you?
No, I haven't been wearing a mask for at least a week. If I were to travel on a plane, sure, I'd put a mask on. If I had some reason to go on a New York subway, yeah, I'd put a mask on at that point. But no, I believe that we should have the freedom to make the choice, and I don't like the mask shaming that is going on the left. Now, look, this whole COVID thing has reflected the worldview of Democrats, progressives, versus us Republicans and conservatives. Their worldview has been revealed to be all about control. Have you noticed that all of the states that have the most oppressive, totalitarian rules in place are blue states? And the states that allow freedom, that allow choice, are red states. What our party's soul is about is choice, liberty, freedom, but responsibility. So if you're going to choose not to wear a mask, you take responsibility for that choice. This whole episode has shown just at the core of the Democrat soul, of the progressive soul, is controlling you, controlling this country. But I have learned, by the way, that if I go participate in a riot, I can not wear a mask and I won't have any risk at all from COVID. You've learned this, right? Now, if I go into a church, apparently, and don't wear a mask, then I'm going to be in real trouble. Did you hear that there were over 1,000 so-called experts and stakeholders who actually wrote a letter to the federal government saying that if you are protesting racism, you are not likely to contract COVID-19. Serious. Tucker Carlson talked about it on his show. This lunacy from the left has to be rejected, and rejected firmly.
Thank you for your response. We now move the question to Mr. Marshall. Your thoughts.
Well, a little Kansas common sense goes a long ways. Of course, I'm not going to be in favor of any federal mandates that state that you have to wear a mask. I think that it is up to the individual. At the same time, I think that a place of business should have the right to say that we need you to wear a mask when you come in. And so I honor the people whose house I'm going to, whose place of business I'm going to. They may be trying to protect a person with some type of an underlying illness. There may be something else going on as well. When you went to a nursing home, I'd suggest you put a mask on. So I think there's places to do it. If you're around sick people getting treatment for cancer as well. But certainly we do have a crisis of our civil liberties. And it does upset me that the Democrats, especially Democrat governors, want to attack our civil liberties. And that it's during a time of crisis especially that these are so important to each and every one of us. And I'm so proud that we have a president that's going to stand up for our rights. And then we have an attorney general with teeth that's going to stand up and protect our rights as well. And help us, if there is a second surge of this virus, to allow us to decide who should and shouldn't be open for their jobs. There's absolutely a double standard by the national media. As a physician, it just drives me crazy. So listen, I think a little Kansas common sense goes a long ways, like most things, and we'll leave it there.
Thank you for the response. We do have another question now. Rural hospitals. We do have a lot of rural hospitals that are still in Kansas. Many are considered to be in crisis. So, with that in mind, what can you tell Kansans about your plan moving forward to improve both rural health care options while sustaining or perhaps improving metro area health care? Mr. Kobach, we begin with you.
There are a number of things that we need to do with respect to rural hospitals. Number one, we have to continue the critical access hospital plan that the federal government has. And what that is if you're a hospital, I believe it's 25 beds or fewer, if you're below that threshold, you can actually get full reimbursement for Medicare expenses, and that gives an additional little infusion of cash to keep those rural hospitals that are going under. We had 5 go under in Kansas last year. It keeps them afloat, and so I think we need that program as well. Secondly, I think what we need to do is continue through the federal government to push rural broadband, because telemedicine is something that is solving a lot of problems. If you can have a virtual appointment with your doctor and then send in by mail the blood sample with a finger stick, which I've done many times as a diabetic, if you can do all of that through telemedicine and have that broadband, rural broadband expansion, that too will help. And then finally, I would say we have to ensure that our rural economies are strong. If our rural economies are strong, that will allow people to be there and attract the doctors. And also, one more point on that, you have a strong economy with providing the jobs, you have a vibrant critical access hospital. Well, how do you ensure that doctors go there? Now, in Kansas, at the state level, we've had rural opportunity zones, and they've had mixed success, generally been successful, but not everywhere. We've never had a federal rural opportunity zones program. I think we need that. And what that would mean is that if you are a nurse, if you are a doctor, if you are someone in the medical profession that could be hired at a hospital, you get a federal tax credit for settling in a rural area. Those 3 things would do a lot for rural health care in Kansas.
Appreciate you answering the question. Again, Mr. Marshall, it goes to you at this point. Would you like me to repeat the question?
I'm good.
And you can go.
Well, certainly, rural hospitals are a reflection of their local economy, and a strong local economy will make a strong local hospital. And as the saying goes in Kansas, as agriculture goes, so goes Kansas. This is why it's so important we send a person to Washington that's qualified to be on the Senate Agriculture Committee so that we can write a strong farm bill and build new hospitals and renovate new hospitals with some of the monies used in that farm bill. Look, again, I would speak to what I've already been doing. I led a group at the Doc Caucus in Congress to help increase Medicare reimbursements for our hospitals. I protected the 340B program. I've increased telemedicine throughout all these hospitals. So these are things that I've already been working on, and thanks to our president, he's given us the leadership and the latitude to be able to do a lot of these things. But let me tell you what's not going to work, and that's Medicare for all. Medicare for all will be rationing of health care and be the end of our hospitals. It'll dilute health care for seniors. It'll be the end of the health insurance you get through your jobs as well. It'll take away TRICARE if you're a veteran. It'll fund federal abortions as well. So what we can't afford to do is to send a person to the general election that cannot win. We have to send a proven conservative with a record that can beat Barbara Bollier.
All right. Thank you for that response. Mr. Lindstrom, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I'm okay with the question.
Thank you.
By the way, here's my mask. I told you. Rural hospitals. Let me just say this. When I retired from the Kansas City Chiefs after 9 years in the NFL, I could have lived anywhere in this country, anywhere. I chose to live in Kansas because of my wife and I thought that this was the best place to live, to work, and to raise a family. So we talk about rural hospitals. The quality of life in the rural Kansas is the same in urban Kansas. The quality of life, if you live in Kansas, you are blessed. You are blessed. Believe me, I've lived in different places. This is a wonderful place to be. We need to talk about it. We have a quality of life. We need to talk about it. So how do people does the economy and population grow in the rural areas? It'll grow by building the economy, and when we build the economy, by what was mentioned earlier, the broadband, telemedicine. Broadband not only will build the economy from telemedicine, but it will also create opportunities. You can live anywhere in the country with broadband and be an entrepreneur. Everything is purchased online. As far as rural hospitals, let's also talk about VA choice. Some of these rural hospitals aren't accommodating some of our veterans. We need to change that. And KU has a plan. KU has a plan where they're encouraging students free education if they'll stay in their communities and become a doctor or a nurse and a healthcare worker in those communities. And that isn't working maybe as well as they would like it to be. They need to encourage K through 12 students to work in that area as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the response to that question. Our rotation now goes back around to the top with Mr. Kobach first, Mr. Marshall second, and then Mr. Lindstrom third for this particular question. Bit of a personal question for me. I have a son who I will say, as a 17-year-old, is amazingly plugged into politics, so I did have him formulate one question with me. The question from him is, he is going to enter the healthcare field soon. He's asking about the Affordable Care Act and what its future will be. What would you tell my son about the ACA? We will begin with Mr. Kobach.
Well, first of all, you all need to know that the ACA is on its last leg, and that last leg is about to get kicked out. You remember that, and thank goodness, I can explain this as a lawyer. You remember this from the 2013 case NFIB versus Sebelius, right? So the Supreme Court said that the ACA is not sustainable as an exercise of the commerce power, but then unfortunately Chief Justice Roberts joined the liberal justice and said, well, hey, we'll call it a tax. And that tax is the $700 tax penalty, give or take, that you pay if you don't buy insurance on the individual mandate. Well, now that Congress took that tax out in 2017, there's no tax in it. And the case is in front of the Supreme Court right now. It won't get decided this month. It'll be decided in the fall. And the Supreme Court is almost certainly going to say, Obamacare is gone because that tax is gone. And that means that we Republicans will have an opportunity to replace it with something much better. And I'd like to talk about what we replace it with. I fear I'm running out of time, but let me just say a few things. First of all, I think we need to have Ted Cruz's bill, which is the Personal Care Act, which would take HSAs, which right now you can only run about $7,000 through an HSA, $7,100, and expand that to $30,000 of tax-free expenditures, and you could pay your insurance premiums with your HSA. Right now, most of us don't have access to an HSA. With Ted Cruz's bill, everybody gets access to an HSA. And that gives us all incentives to do things cheaper. We can then afford to use that to pay for cash for some medicines. There will be more price pressure, downward price pressure on prescriptions. And so that's what I would be, first of all, is signing on with Ted Cruz for that bill.
Thank you for the response. In the next order of business, Mr. Marshall, your thoughts.
Well, first of all, I think folks need to realize that both Democrats and Republicans want the end to the ACA. The Democrats want to replace it with Medicare for all, versus Republicans like myself want to give patients more choices. I'm so proud to be nominated by the Republican Study Committee to lead on the replacement bill for this legislation. I'm proud to sit down and be working continuously with the President and his administration on what this solution looks like. When I sat down with the President to discuss health care, the first thing he said was, Roger, whatever you do, take care of pre-existing conditions. After all, who in the audience doesn't have a pre-existing condition or a family member with a pre-existing condition? The other part of the equation is driving the prices down. How do you do that? Through patient empowerment, through competition, and innovation. Patient empowerment, what does that mean? More transparency, expanding HSAs, HRAs, expanding association healthcare plans. Healthcare ministries are more options. More and more direct primary care. There's so many things that we could do to drive the price of healthcare down by empowering patients to be consumers once again. On the competition side of things, the ACA eliminated competition. It increased the rules. I lived through the nightmare. The biggest nightmare of my life was implementing the ACA when I was helping run a hospital and a doctor's practice as well. So that all those rules led to consolidation. Innovation is going to do more to drive the cost of health care down than anything we can do. Think about hepatitis. Once upon a time it was a death sentence. Now you take a pill for 12 weeks and it's done. We haven't even talked about the pharmacy prices, what we can do to help drive them down. I've been proud to work with President Trump that for the first time in a decade, prescription prices are only going up 1 or 2%. Thank you.
Thank you for the response. Mr. Lindstrom, your answer to the question, please.
What's your son's name?
Gavin.
Tell Gavin that if I go to the Senate, we're going to replace Obamacare. Okay? I thought we'd get more of a clap than that. We need to replace it. We need to replace it with something that's accessible, affordable, transparent, and most importantly, market-driven. When I say market-driven, today's healthcare system is a fee-for-service. And what that means is the providers are getting paid for providing service, not for providing outcome. We need to have a system where we're measuring outcomes instead. And another new plan would also include pre-existing conditions. It would include right to try. And the President talked about right to try as it was related to COVID. And then it would also include young folks would be able to stay on their parents' insurance till 26.
Thank you for that. Okay, we have a next question. We'll begin this round with Mr. Marshall. Mental health continues to be an issue for first responders as they respond. I know the sheriff was here. He's talked about this at length here in Sedgwick County. It's an issue that families deal with as they scramble to get help for their loved ones, and communities as they search for answers to mental health issues. What can you offer Kansans in the fight on the mental health front? We'll begin with Mr. Marshall.
Well, this is something I actually visited with the chiefs of police with yesterday from across the state and the sheriff's officers from across the state as well. What can we do to help them? First of all, we talked about through their own association have some type of a peer group, and they actually have some new technology to help them identify people that are under stress, some type of a regular assessment, much like going in and getting your own blood pressure checked, some type of a mental health assessment. And then they pointed out, of course, that we don't have enough psychiatrists to help them out. And what my suggestion was is, again, to form these peer groups as well. I fought very hard for high-speed internet to allow this type of situation to occur. It's something that actually was one of the biggest challenges of Kansas, one of the biggest disappointments of my professional career, is that we really have not improved the access to mental health. And people that we used to have in institutions are now in our streets so often. So it's something I've been trying to address. I actually just worked with the VA, helping address their homeless problem and their mental health problem. Secretary just recently announced a new program for that. So it's something that I've continually worked on. I know it's a priority, that it's important that this country keep our promises to our veterans. As a veteran myself, 7 years in the Army Reserve, my dad a veteran, my brother a veteran, this is a huge issue for me, the mental health of our veterans. We're losing some 21, 22 veterans every day to suicide. So I'm going to keep working on this challenge. It's time for us to move forward with it.
Thank you for that. We now go to Mr. Kobach. Your response, please.
I agree with a lot of what Roger said. Look, the institutions being closed over previous decades has led to a lot of people with mental health issues being on the streets and in some cases in prison. That's not the solution. We do need to find ways for them to get the treatment they need. And I think all federal programs, whether Medicaid, Medicare, and all other federal programs that subsidize medical care should include mental health. And where that change needs to be made, I will make it. But I want to spend the rest of my time talking about the previous question. There's another thing that really needs to be done on a broader issue for health care, and this will drive down prescription drug costs. So I've been a type 1 diabetic since age 11, 1977. As you know, type 1 diabetic, you depend on insulin to stay alive. A bottle of insulin cost $3 back in 1977. You know what the cost is today? Almost $300. There have been no great advances. Insulin's been around since 1921. Why is that? It's because there's no generic competition. There are only 2 companies in the world, as far as I know, that make insulin. Well, why are there no generics? Did you know that federal law right now has a loophole? Every other medicine, and 90% of prescriptions are filled with generics right now, every other medicine can have generic competition. But biologic medicines, medicines that are made from a living organism, like insulin, are not allowed to have generic competition. It's a ridiculous loophole that makes people like me, and I have a diabetic daughter too, so between the two of us, it's about $1,000 a month on insulin. A lot of people can't afford it. We need to eliminate that loophole so that there's generic competition for biologic medicines, and it's not just insulin, it's cancer drugs, it's MS drugs, and arthritis drugs. That would drive down prices for a huge percentage. It could drop prices as much as 15% in all of our expenditures and prescriptions.
Thank you for that response. So the mental health question comes back to Mr. Lindstrom.
Yes. Regarding mental health, I was a county commissioner in Johnson County for 10 years. And we were very proud of our mental health department there. I also know many folks who have mental health issues from my former profession in professional sports, the chronic traumatic encephalitis, the CTE that you hear and read a lot about. The federal government needs to do what they can to support our states and local government the best they can with their mental health programs. And I also want to use the remainder of my time to talk about something else that needs to be talked about as it relates to mental health as well, and suicides. Mental health leads to many suicides. Our ag and our cattle producers in this state, they're suffering right now. They're suffering. They're suffering because we have 4 major packing plants in this country, and 2 of them are foreign-owned. Cattle producers are losing their shirts. And as it relates to mental health, when you're not being able to support your family, it causes issues. We need to care about our cattle producers, and we need to work on antitrust laws so that we have American-owned processing plants.
All right. Thank you for that response. We will move on to our next question. And it will begin with Mr. Lindstrom on the answer back here. Kansas has long been considered by outsiders, as well as people who live here, a Republican-dominant state. Realizing that Kansans offer a very diverse opinion set, what, if anything, are Democrats doing that could be helpful in moving health care forward? Your response.
What are Democrats doing?
Correct. That could work with Republicans.
Oh, that would work for us? They've talked about pre-existing conditions. I mentioned that earlier. I don't believe that they're ready for right to try, but they also have, I think, the two things that would be meritorious in a Republican plan would be the pre-existing conditions, and it would be allowing young folks to stay on their parents' insurance to 26.
Thank you for the response. Question now goes to Mr. Kobach.
I agree with much of what Dave just said. I would like to answer the question in the specific context of COVID. What are the Democrats doing that we can agree with? Not much at all, frankly. I mean, that $3 trillion boondoggle that Nancy Pelosi showed us, which was a lot of subsidies for blue state spending, all kinds of pork thrown in there, I don't think they are reaching across the aisle in any serious way. And I think we need to recognize that and recognize that there will be a battle there. And furthermore, we have to show up and fight that battle. Now, I'm going to make a criticism here. There were two votes that Roger Marshall didn't show up for. Part 3 of President Trump's relief packages and the Nancy Pelosi $3 trillion bill. He didn't show up to vote no because he was here in Kansas doing a photo op. Look, if you want to be a doctor, be a doctor. Go for it. But the people of the 1st District hired you to show up and vote. You know who did show up to vote against Nancy Pelosi's bill? Sharice Davids, the Democrat representing Kansas's 3rd District. She showed up and voted against Nancy Pelosi. But the Republican representative from the 1st District of Kansas couldn't be bothered to show up. So Sharice Davids did more for Republicans in shooting down that Pelosi bill than Roger Marshall did. I would say if you're going to take this job, do the job. Show up, and when the Democrats fight, you show up ready to take your gloves off and fight them, because they are fighting, and we need a fighter in the U.S. Senate.
I appreciate that. At this point, the question goes to Mr. Marshall. And Mr. Marshall, we will offer you the rebuttal time first, if you would like to take that.
Right. This is another attack by a desperate, failed candidate who has failed President Trump. I would always choose helping patients over going to D.C. and watching a vote that was all show, a big parade. I will always choose helping patients and take care of people. When I saw this virus exploding in southwest Kansas, I went down there, helped organize testing. I helped them in the ICUs. I helped them in the ERs. I guess this is just about as low as you can get for a failed candidate to attack me for helping take care of Kansans. I will always choose helping out Kansans whenever I have that particular choice. And make sure, and for sure I'm going to make sure that we keep this seat in Republicans' hands and make sure that we don't give the Democrats the majority in the Senate. And that's what will really impact us. That's what really matters, is making sure that we keep a majority in the Senate.
Thank you for the rebuttal time. Now, if you'd like, you have your regular... You do have your regular time to respond to that question as well.
All right. Well, certainly there's a couple pieces of legislation that I am working on with Democrats. One's regarding prior authorization and surprise billing. We've also had some work together on the right to try bill that Dave mentioned as well. That was a great success for us. We've done a lot of good bipartisan work to help our veterans as well. We've had some opportunities to work on drug pricing, but really every day I'm afraid we get further and further apart. That while we want to give you more choices, we want to empower patients. They want the federal government to control your health care. They want to tell you where to take your mom and dad for their Alzheimer's treatment. They want to tell you where to take your kids for their ear tubes. So more and more it's becoming a struggle. And that truly is what we have at risk. this fall. That if we send the wrong person and we turn over the majority to the Democrats, that they will have the votes to give us Medicare for all. That's what's really at risk, and that's what's at stake here, folks.
Thank you for that response. We appreciate it. So, the next question will begin with Mr. Kobach. The question is, there are Kansans who cannot afford health care but still don't qualify for the Affordable Care Act. What would be needing to change here?
Well, here too, I would talk about cutting prescription drug prices. Let me tell you a little bit more about this whole area of biologic medicines. It's not just diabetics like me who are suffering. Did you know that biologics are only 2% of prescriptions that are prescribed that are filled in America today? But did you know that they could constitute 17% of all the costs? And so if we allow generic competition, just on the same terms as other drugs, if you allow generic competition there, then after 8 years, then you can have generics competing, and the price will drop dramatically. And that will make it possible for people like me. In our family, we couldn't afford health insurance. I'm a solo practitioner lawyer with 5 kids, family of 7. I used to be under the state's health plan when I was the Blue Cross Blue Shield, when I was a state employee as your Secretary of State. I found out if you're self-employed, and you've got a family of 7, your head's going to explode if you talk to the insurance companies. It's unaffordable. And so I see this as a personal issue for me. I'm looking for every way we can reduce the cost of prescription medicines, and so that's and all other care. And so that's why I think we need, again, to allow generic competition for biologics. There are a lot of medicines that this involves. We need to expand HSA so that we get favorable tax treatment. We also rely on a Christian health sharing to cover our larger costs. We do direct primary care for our daily costs. So see a doctor for $150 a month, you can see him anytime. That started here in Wichita, by the way. But we also need to allow deductibility for the money you pay for Christian health sharing. Did you know you can't deduct that? There's no tax advantage to Christian health sharing. So we need to look at the tax advantages, we need to look at reducing prescription prices, and we also need to allow competition across state lines.
Thank you for that response. Appreciate it. The question now goes to Mr. Marshall.
Well, first of all, this is truly a jobs issue. That if we can help folks get a good job with good insurance, that's really the big solution, is how do we move people from a welfare to work? The next thing I would talk about are federally qualified health clinics. Federally qualified health clinics, there's 50 of them across the state of Kansas. They get subsidized care from the government. The only thing that they can't do that Planned Parenthood does is abortions. So that's why I love these federally qualified health clinics. They do wellness checks. They do primary care, everything but abortions. As an obstetrician, unfortunately, I've seen the results of what Planned Parenthood does. And a girl that walks into one of those offices for a pregnancy test, and next thing you know, she's been scheduled for an abortion. So that's why I love these federally qualified health clinics to help folks that need some help. We need to drive the price of health care down, obviously. We do that by giving people more choices, making it more affordable. And I talked a little bit more about that before. From the drug pricing standpoint, look, I'm so proud of the work we've done with President Trump. We're actually approving twice the number of generics now than we were when President Obama was in office. We need to eliminate the kickbacks from the pharmacy benefit managers. We need to promote innovation. We need to promote competition. We've lost almost half of our community pharmacists because of pharmacy benefits managers' clawback problems that we have going on. So those are a few of the solutions we have, but mainly it's a jobs issue. We need to make sure that we have good jobs in Kansas that have good health care.
Thank you for the response. Mr. Lindstrom, I would ask you to answer the question, please. Thank you.
Would you repeat the question again, please?
Sure. At this point, there are Kansans who cannot afford health care but still don't qualify for the Affordable Care Act. How can you see this changing?
Yeah. Well, I think government's main job, is to protect the vulnerable and the at-risk populations of our country. And if someone is at risk, whether or not they need the health care services, I think there is a role for government to provide some assistance for them. But if they're able-bodied, I think they need to be able to try to fend for themselves. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think we need to change the system so that health care is more affordable. If it's more affordable, then those folks who are falling through the cracks probably could afford those services. There are doctors who are donating their services, but we need to change some of the laws, because many times doctors will not donate their services because they will have they are liable if there's some problems there. So if we change some federal laws that will indemnify the doctors who are donating their time, I think that would be a wonderful idea. Anything that we do, we need to reduce the cost of health care, and that is transparency. It's market-driven health care. Remove the middleman.
Thank you for that answer. Appreciate it. We now go to another question. It looks like time-wise this may be the last question we're going to get in, and it will start on the rotation basis with Mr. Kobach. So this question is, what public input will help better our health care? Not just maybe corporate input, but the input of Kansans who kind of live paycheck to paycheck trying to decide if they can afford health care.
I'm not quite sure I understand the question. So public input, you mean?
Would there be public input from just regular Kansas residents who could help?
Well, whenever federal law is passed, there are public hearings, and of course there is that public input. There's not a formalized process like we have with rules and regulations where there's a comment period where people are invited to write comments when you're talking about a federal statute. But look, I mean, whether we have a formal public input or whether we have an informal public input with millions of Americans saying, look, I can't afford the health care I've had. I can't afford the type of the drug I'd like for my MS treatment because it's too expensive, and I'll have to use the one that doesn't work. We have a true crisis here that I'm sure everybody in this room, if not the people in this room, know someone who's having a really hard time affording medications and affording medical care. And so we have to have market-driven solutions. You know, one of the things I've found for my situation, we have this, we have direct primary care to cover our normal primary care visits, and we have the Christian medical sharing to cover the really big expenses. But what about prescriptions? We pay out of cost. Most people don't know what the true price is. Most of you probably never walked up and said, I'll just pay cash for this prescription. Maybe you have, and if you have, you've had the same experience I have. You're like, what? And they say, well, no, yeah, normally the insurance covers, half of this or covers 90% of this. But we have to have, that's part of what I think Dave said earlier about taking out the middleman. When the insurance is the middleman and people don't know what the true price is, then there's no competitive pressure. Then there's no people going in a private marketplace and competing, and the companies competing for our dollars to bring it down. So I will always be looking for competitive solutions, and those will answer the input that so many Kansans have already given.
Thank you for the answer to that question. Question in turn next to Mr. Marshall.
Well, listen, I've always said that the best doctors are good listeners, and I believe the best senators are also good listeners. And I've already made that a point to get public input. I've done more town halls than any member of Congress since I arrived in Congress. We've also done multiple live telephone town halls, and we do live Facebook events as well. Probably over the past 2 weeks, we have talked to many of the stakeholders, the hospital association, pharmacists, physical therapists, different doctors groups, as well as different patient advocacy groups as well. So I think we're doing that already. And I think that the ability to take all those ideas and then formulate them into a plan is why President Trump and the Republicans have asked me to write health care policy. That we have great policy ready to go, but we're going to need a Republican majority in both the Senate and the House to get it passed, and we're going to need a Republican president as well. So I look forward to just doing just that, to repeal Obamacare once again. You may recall on the House side the 115th Congress, we did repeal Obamacare, and unfortunately it was not repealed on the Senate side. But we're ready to take another stab at it, and I think we've got a great plan that's going to take care of pre-existing conditions as well as drive the cost of health care down and protect health care for seniors. Thank you.
Thank you for the response. And I move the question to Mr. Lindstrom. Your thoughts on public input? Could it help with health care?
I'm going to be really concise here. First of all, as it relates to having town hall meetings, there's a difference between listening and hearing. There's a difference. You have to hear your constituents. Public input. Yes, there should be public input, and there is public input. And I've talked about the public input earlier tonight when I diverted off of one of the health care issues. That public input is called term limits. Term limits. If you want a better system, in my closing remarks, I'm going to talk about this. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again in hoping for different results. Folks, you got to take control of this. Vote.
Thank you for that response. So as this time we have come up to the end of our hour, so we will have closing responses at this time. It will go with Mr. Lindstrom, followed by Mr. Kobach, followed by Mr. Marshall. Mr. Lindstrom, your closing statements.
I just mentioned it. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and waiting for a different result. Well, I've had enough of the political insanity in the state of Kansas. I've had enough of the anarchists who are trying to defund and abolish the police. I've had enough of career politicians who are divisive, controversial, have a record of mismanagement, and losing elections to Democrats in big races. I've had enough of wannabe career politicians who conduct shady backroom deals after being charged with and prosecuted for reckless driving and battery. I've had enough of party politics in the Kansas version of the swamp that unprofessionally and unjustifiably attempted to take away the right of Kansas voters to choose their next senator. If you've had enough, I offer you a solution. I offer you a proven businessman who has the right combination of authenticity, toughness, temperament, public service, and community commitment. I don't represent special interest. I'm not afraid to stand up to authority. I win elections, and I will always be committed to you, the Kansas voters. I humbly ask you for your support in your vote on August 4th. God bless you, and God bless the great state of Kansas.
Thank you. Closing, Mr. Kobach.
Well, Dave's comments have prompted me to shift my closing remarks somewhat. I agree with what he just said. We have electability, we all agree. We want this senator to get elected. And part of getting elected means you have to know what the negatives are on a candidate. I've been in 3 statewide races, won 2 out of 3, and everybody knows what the negatives are going to be. They've been out there for a long time. But now, just in the Wichita Eagle, we saw something come up about a shady backroom deal that made some crime go away. Well, the person involved, I won't mention his name, but he's up here on stage, has said he won't release the affidavit of probable cause, which will tell us the police report, and then we'll know what it is. I would say, if that person might be our Republican candidate, let's find out now, rather than later, when it's too late, and Barbara Bollier brings it up. Look, you guys know I'm a fighter, and you guys know that there's only one person on this stage who's been criticized by name, by Chuck Schumer, by AOC, by Sheila Jackson Lee, and by Rachel Maddow. And I could go on for a few more. Mr. Cuomo, when not showing people his biceps, has criticized me as well. Look, there's a reason they've criticized me by name. It's because they see what I've done, and I threaten their worldview. I threaten their agenda. And you have a choice. Do you want someone who's going to go to the Senate and be just a go-along, get-along, smiley face who never fights back? Or do you want a fighter who threatens their worldview? Because let me tell you, I will be the only along with President Trump, the only thing standing between them and the Constitution that they are trying to destroy, the police departments that they're trying to destroy, the ICE officers that they are trying to destroy. We are in a different era in American politics. The days are gone when Bob Dole could reach across the aisle and shake hands with Scoop Jackson and they'd come to mutual terms. The Democrats, have declared war. And when they declare war, we have to go to battle, and we have to be prepared to fight. Now, you know that the Wichita Eagle and a lot of papers have said some pretty nasty things about me. And they're going to continue to say nasty things about me in the Senate. But I don't care, because I know I work for you.
Closing statements for Mr. Marshall.
Listen, I believe every election is about the future. And when Kansans walk into the polling booth this fall, they're going to look at the list of candidates and they're going to have 2 questions. Who from this list of candidates has helped me, who has helped my family through this virus? And who is best prepared to protect our health and bring us back to prosperity? I want to share with you tonight that since January the 28th, I've been working to protect you and your family from the coronavirus. When I was the first member of Congress to stand up and publicly address the coronavirus. Every morning since then, I've woken up trying to figure out what can I do to help Kansans be safer. The first thing I did was help make sure that your doctors, your nurses, your hospitals had everything that they needed in case you or your loved one got sick. I personally volunteered at corona clinics. I worked in hospitals, ICU and ERs, and I made sure all across the state that everybody had everything they needed as far as testing supplies and PPEs. Now, many of us are very fortunate that we were not impacted by this virus in a physical way, but there's not a person in this room whose job was not impacted. So as your congressman, I worked hard. I helped pass a bipartisan $2 trillion funding to help stabilize our economy and prevent us from going into a Great Depression. Most every Kansan got a $1,200 check. We made the unemployment benefits better, and I'm so proud of the Paycheck Protection Program, which saved over 400,000 Kansans' jobs. Now the good news is, President Trump's plan, our plan is working, and our economy is already bouncing back. And what I'll promise you is I'm going to keep standing with our president, that I'm going to keep standing beside you and your family with both hands on the wheel, as a doctor and as a senator, to make sure that your family's health is protected, that you get your jobs back, and that our kids safely and responsibly get back to school. But I'm going to need your help, and that's why I'm asking for your vote on August the 4th. Thank you so much. God bless this wonderful country, and God bless the state of Kansas.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall.
All right. Thank you all for attending tonight, and can we give a round of applause to these three candidates? Does everyone agree that and I'm curious, do you think that any one of these three candidates would be better than what the Democrats are putting up for this Senate seat? Big thank you to all three of you. A reminder, the last of our 4 debates will be in the 2nd District on July 15. July 15. That'll be in Atchison in the 2nd District. So we hope you'll join us there. We'll also live stream it. Can we give appreciation to our moderator, Craig?